Hello and welcome to this week's masterclass. Actually, we'll just call it a Q&A and an information session on wealth wisdom. Protect yourself, your family, and your assets. I am Ann Babiarz, and I am here with attorney Michael A. Babiarz, and we are going to jump right in and talk about wealth wisdom. Welcome to the show, Mr. Babiarz.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Babiarz.
And I'm so happy that you are joining me to talk about this today because I think it's a lot of topics that are coming of age. It's always timeless material, but I think it's a really, really good time to jump into such things today. And so
Mhm.
what I'd like to start with is what is the focus of the course, of the program? Wealth, wisdom, protect yourself, your family, and your assets.
Well, really, and the title kind of says it all. It's focused on three big issues that are things that maybe keep people awake at night, especially as they're uh, planning towards retirement or that next chapter in life. And that's worries about whether they protected their assets so that they can't lose them in some way, worries that someone else might actually try to take control of their assets. And then finally, worries that perhaps they don't have enough assets for that next chapter in life.
And I would think that that does keep a lot of people awake, especially now in inflationary times and such. What would you say when someone asks you or just expresses the view that they feel like they haven't protected their money? What would be your
Well,
first thoughts on
well,
that?
and I think that that actual concern can be broken down into some sub points, if you will. People sometimes have worries over a lawsuit wiping them out. Somebody's going to sue them and they haven't protected their assets. Or they have maybe creditors down the road where they're going to come after their assets. Or some people even have worries that some for some form of government, whether it's federal, state, or whatever, is actually coming for their money. So a lot of these, and some of these fears are more cute and perhaps more realistic than others. But I think that's sort of three areas that one overarching concern may break down into.
So when you have someone that is worried about such things, what if they don't really have a lot of assets?
Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that there is nothing there to protect, because when we talk about assets in this context, as it's used in the program that you're offering, it really is a broader definition. And there are things that are very valuable assets that people may not even consider. For example, your reputation can be a very valuable asset. Your identity. We hear a lot of stories about identity thieves hopping on someone's identity and stealing it, and ruining their credit rating and getting them ensnared in all kinds of problems. Your identity is an asset. Your very being is an asset. So it does just because you don't have, mega bucks stocked away, you're not Jeff Bezos or Warren Buffett or something like that. Doesn't mean you have nothing to protect. There can be a lot of things that you may want to protect. And sometimes the protection can also take the form of easing misery from you. For example, the first one I mentioned about where people say, well, maybe I haven't protected myself well enough. Worry about lawsuits. Say you have a car accident. What if you don't have insurance or sufficient insurance? That's going to be a headache for you, certainly, because you don't have anybody to defend you. One of the big issues of your insurance coverage is the insurance company agrees to provide lawyers to defend you from those types of things. So you need to understand that insurance in some cases may be part of your defense strategy. It's certainly not the be all end all because there's many, many more components and pieces to this. But to go back to your comment about people that say, well, I don't really have anything. Why do I care? Because you do have something. If you're walking on this earth, you have your identity and you have your reputation and you have your peace of mind. And if you lose one of those three things because you aren't paying attention to these issues, your life's not going to be too great for that period of time.
Oh, absolutely. What about people who have children?
Well, they kind of fall almost into that second point where people are worried that someone else might try to take control over their assets. And family can be our best allies or our worst enemies very often in the asset protection world because family can help protect you from other people taking advantage of you. Family can also be the people that take advantage of you. So it's a double-edged sword. And a lot of times, especially in today's world, we see situations where there's blended families. You know, the Brady Bunch was a very novel concept in the 70s, maybe for a TV show, not to mention the burnt orange kitchen, which we can talk
No
about
one
in
wants that now.
another scenario. But that's not so uncommon anymore. Mother Nature's a mad scientist these days. We have all kinds of different relationships, all kinds of different blending of families. We have biological families, we have step families, we have families of choice. We have all kinds of different definitions and ways of connecting with the people that are important to us. And sometimes we want to disconnect from people that think they should be important to us, but maybe they really aren't.
Very good points. What about small business owners? How could this program benefit them?
Well, and that's another key issue because how many of us today are actually small business owners and don't realize it? Number one, if you are a gig worker, as the phrase is now parlayed about, that means basically you're not a W-2 guy. Nobody's taking taxes out of a paycheck for you. Maybe you drive for Uber, or maybe you clean houses for a living, or maybe you're a consultant and you work remotely as needed, and you get a 1099 instead of a W-2. When you're a gig worker, you're in business for yourself. And if there's a problem that arises because of the services you engage in, you have to be really careful about whether or not the person into which you've entered into a contractual relationship is going to protect you from any problems. Because the number one rule in plaintiffs is sue everybody and let them all figure it out. So if you're, a consultant and you give somebody bad advice but you're under a contract with a company, they're going to sue that company and you, the client. And do you have insurance to cover that? And more importantly, have you done any planning on your own? One of the Sometimes professionals don't have a lot of options as far as protecting themselves from liability through asset entities, but most small businesses, um, with some exceptions, I'm a lawyer, so there's always an exception. But a lot of small businesses need to be LLCs or corporations to try to limit that liability, and they need to make sure they not only organize themselves that way, they behave like a corporation or LLC to maintain that limitation on liability. So small businesses, yeah, absolutely, they are key, and a lot of it has to do with entity protection. Insurance obviously factors in there. Uh, on the end, there's a lot more factors that, of course, the program goes into, very granular detail on. But the second and cogent point about businesses is, are you a business? You really need to look at that and answer that question. Because if you get a 1099, you're probably a business.
Well, that's true. And if you are an LLC or a corporation, there could be issues with what they call piercing the corporate veil. If somebody
Mhm.
is not really behaving like a business within those entities, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be things as stupidly simple as, on your emails or your business cards or your stationery, When you sign stuff, do you sign your own name or do you sign your own name and put after it president of whatever corporation you have or manager of whatever LLC you have created? You know, in other words, are you holding out to the world that you are an entity? Because that's really important. Anybody who does business with you, in fact, anybody who looks at your business, so your website, can't just say, like, for example, I'm looking at your background there, pilot fish, personal, and it goes behind this beautiful lady here, but it
There's
goes,
an LLC over
there's an
there.
LLC at the end. Yes, there is. So you, even on this very Zoom call, you're identifying to the world, and I can see that LLC, that you're an LLC, which is good. I didn't think your name was Pilot Fish anyway, but you can do a DBA as a sole proprietorship. So simple things like holding out to the world that you're an LLC is important. Fulfilling formalities. Corporations have to have minutes, have to have meetings, have to have stock certificates. LLC should have an operating agreement. You should always have a separate tax ID number for these entities. And you shouldn't commingle funds. You know, if you want to take a draw out of your company, take a draw out of your company and move that money to your personal account, pay your bills. You know, don't pay your babysitter out of your LLC account because that's clearly a personal bill. Don't start commingling stuff. Do the extra step of moving the money over first. Because a clever plaintiff's attorney, that's one of the first things they're going to look at is, can I get behind the corporate or LLC arrangement? And the other thing is for creditors. Now, if as a small business, you're probably going to be asked to personally guarantee loans. But as you get bigger and get the business gets a little bit more of a reputation and maybe a Dun and Bradstreet rating or something, you don't necessarily have to do that. And you can say, "Oh no, this loan is a debt of the LLC only. It's not mine." And you better make sure you sign the papers with the little, you know, manager or president or whatever after your name, and make sure the language is in there that says there's no personal guarantees.
Would there be a way that if, let's just say you take out a loan that was made in the name of the LLC and you've done everything appropriately, would there be a way that they could make it your personal responsibility outside of that, or will it always stand?
Well, you never say never as an attorney. There's always gray areas. But what I can say is that when you follow the formalities, when you've organized a limited liability entity of some sort, like an LLC, like a corporation, and you follow the formalities and you follow the best practices set forth for someone engaging in business as a protected entity, you've made their job a lot harder to reach your personal assets.
Excellent. I know that there are a lot of issues right now coming out of the pandemic with people that took out loans from different organizations and so forth.
Mhm.
And a lot of them are gig workers, and they're not doing what they were doing back then anymore because for whatever reason, the business failed. But if they did not set things up appropriately, they could be personally liable for their business's debts. And that's not a fun
Potentially.
thing to be.
Yeah, potentially. And the other thing too is if you have married couples where one of the partners is involved in a business, it's often a best practice also, you know, husbands and wives and, you know, partners like to help each other in their businesses, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But you want to be sure that the business is only tied to one of the two parties so that, again, if somebody is able to get through the protected entity, they're not looking to perhaps join assets or, again, we get into some of the solutions to this, but many states, for example, allow you to title things like a family home in something called tenancy by the entireties. That's another way of a married couple holding title to their residence that makes it unavailable to a creditor of only one. So that's another reason for keeping the business, if it's only operated by one of the partners, keeping it separate so that if something does come through the business entity and then that its judgment attaches to one of the two, the house and tenancy by the entirety is protected because the judgment never attached to the other individual in that relationship.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Very, very, very complex issues, really. If people are not aware of what stumbling blocks there are, it could be very
True.
possible to find yourself in a situation that you never, ever intended.
Well, and I think the way that the program is set up that you've implemented here through Pilotfish is that this program is not going to answer all the questions because first of all, there's 50 states and there's 50 sets of asset protection rules and 50 sets of probably best practices. However, what the program really can do is get you thinking about how to ask the right questions. Because if you know the right questions to ask, you can find the right answers, whether it's doing some research on your own and then following up with professionals or going straight to the professionals. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing your own research so long as you get it confirmed by the right people. But again, it, don't be thinking that you'd be walking into a program where it's, as you said, yes, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of moving pieces, but I think it's been crafted and presented the way your firm does it in such a way that it's not going to be giving you legal or financial advice anyway. It's going to be saying there's a lot of these issues. It's issue spotting and asking the right questions so people can be prepared to discuss and make plans with their professional advisors for a lot of it. I guess I should back off from that because you even have things in there about a lot of things people don't even realize. Like for example, if a water, a pipe breaks in your house and there's water pouring all over the place, do you know where the main shutoff is? Because the faster you can get to that and shut the water off, the less damage is happening to your house. And you know what? Your house is one of many people's biggest asset. Why not make sure it doesn't get damaged or burnt down or, any of those things?
Well, and that is another good point because one of the things that you have really, really pounded into my brain, and that is all about flood insurance, especially here in the state of Florida.
Mhm.
If you don't have flood insurance and you have a hurricane and the waters breach your house, guess what? You will not have insurance.
All right, run out in the yard and throw a rock through the window. No, I'm kidding. Totally kidding.
Because
No, yeah, you're right that because insurance companies will try to point fingers at each other, and let, and if you have both of them on board, you have homeowners and flood, let them fight it out amongst yourselves. But the bottom line is one of them is going to have to pay for it, and it isn't going to be you.
Well, and I'm going to jump to another topic, and this is something that a lot of my clients ask me about, and that is the implication of long-term care. What happens if your spouse or other family member, maybe it's your parent, your one of your parents, who pays for that? Is it an insurance cost or what kind of how does that work?
Well, a very complicated issue. Let me see what I can surmise here in a minute or so. Long-term care in general, if it's not medically related, in other words, you're basically, and this is the overwhelming reason why most people enter some form of long-term care, whether it's going to a nursing home or it's having at-home care come into their home and take care of them. The vast majority of people, the reason they do that is because of illness or aging, they simply lose cognitive ability. It's generally not you need physical rehab to get better. It's because you have some form of dementia, you've had a stroke, you've had Alzheimer's, you've had something along those lines. And typically, those types of things are not paid for by things like Medicare or typical Medicare health insurance. There is long-term care insurance you could purchase, and that's something else you can discuss with one of your advisors. There are government programs that help pay for care in a nursing home, but that's under the Medicaid program, which is a totally different animal. Easy way to think of that, Medicare is insurance, Medicaid is welfare. One
Mm.
word answer for what each is. So with Medicaid being welfare, you got to qualify for it. And that said, there are programs in place in each of the states to help out the spouse of someone that needs long-term care, because we don't want husband needs nursing home care. We don't want the wife to have to spend all the assets down and eat dog food for dinner in order to get coverage for her husband now in the nursing home. They have each state has enacted provisions under the guidance or the top line of spousal impoverishment. We're trying to prevent spouses from being impoverished. And it's not, it's a little bit of benevolence on the part of the government, but it's also a little bit of self-interest because we don't want two people on welfare. And that's what would happen if we didn't have provisions to allow the spouse to keep some assets. And those provisions get really complicated because Medicare is federal. The rules are the same, other than California is a little wonky, but the rules are basically the same nationwide. Medicaid is a joint program between the federal government and the state. So we have 50 sets of rules. So you need to know the rules in the state in which you reside to know how that can best be planned for, and if it's already imminent or necessary, how it can be implemented.
Yeah, and there are some very, very complicated rules. For instance, the spend down, all of those things that go along with getting an approval for the Medicaid program. There's a lot there. And that's
And
something where you really need an attorney to help you sort that out, isn't it?
yes, absolutely, because and I did that for a number of years in my own private practice. And the number one question, and people sometimes ask it very innocently. They go, well, my so and so is going into a nursing home. How do I hide the assets? The word hide, the phrase hide the assets is always there. And the answer is you don't. You can't, you don't. That's usually, taking you into realms of Medicaid fraud and things like that. The proper question is there a way to protect the assets? And the answer is usually yes. Because anything you can think of simply going, well, I'll just give everything to my kids or whatever. The people that write the rules for the government are not dumb. Anything you've thought of, they've already thought of it and already seen it and already know what it is. And there's no way you're going to be able to put one over. You may think, oh, this is just a caseworker at some government agency. What does he or
Oh
she know?
no.
Oh, they know a lot. They know a lot.
They absolutely do. And I can remember from my days of helping you with Medicaid applications and getting people approved. It's not an easy process. And
No,
to have professional advice on that is definitely,
right.
definitely.
You you do it within the rules, you do it completely transparently, you tell the caseworker exactly what you've done and how it exactly fits within the rules. That's that's the best practice in that area.
Yeah, it's very interesting because it just brings back to just one of the cases. I'm not going to obviously talk about who it was or anything.
No war stories here. Go
A
for it.
little war story. We did have one where the couple actually gambled their money away, and they literally spent their money at the boats. So really looking at that and going, okay, how do you substantiate that to a caseworker? The reality is they had no money because they they lost it all. And so while you think, okay, well, you it's just an interesting situation
Right.
that we had. And I'm
Yeah,
sure
and
it's
how do you prove something like that? You go,
right.
well, look, they bought lunch here at the riverboat every day. Why were they sitting on a riverboat eating lunch and not gambling? Or their friends or their family would sign affidavits maybe saying, hey, mom and dad went to the boats every day, or even their favorite dealer at the blackjack table, if that's what they like to play, or people that are compulsive. Not that we're recommending this as a Medicaid plan. This is
No, not at
certainly
all.
not.
Not at
But
all.
people that get into that habit of going to the same casino every day, they go, "Hey, this is John. He's my favorite blackjack dealer." Or they get comps. Hey, this is my frequent the equivalent of the frequent flyer card, right? This is my little VIP card because I spend so much money at this place. So there are ways to document what happened. And look, they took a draw out of $1,000 of the bank that day, and then they took another $1,000 the next day. What's going on here? So it's challenging. Certainly, it's very challenging. But if that's legitimately what happened, that's again not a recommended plan, but in their case, they were approved.
Well, and then that brings to mind another one, and this is another senior issue. And that was, we did have another client, and this was not a Medicaid issue per se. This particular person was smart. She had long-term care insurance. She had everything laid out for herself in her senior years. She was scammed, and she had a lottery company, one of the fake lottery companies literally took about $50,000 from her retirement plan. There was no way to get that back.
No, no.
So if you
I
have,
mean, yeah, for things like that, can you show police reports? Can you show you reported it somewhere? You got to prove that you took some effort to report the crime uh, to an appropriate agency. But yeah, exactly. Somebody overseas in some third world country, the FBI would be who you'd report it to. And are they going to likely get your money back? No, not going to
they
happen.
don't have enough time. They don't have time for that.
They
But
don't have the resources, the time, the manpower. It's not happening.
it's it's unfortunate though, and this is something that's happening to a lot of seniors. They're getting scammed.
Sure,
So it's
sure,
something
absolutely.
for your with when you're watching out for your loved ones, definitely something to pay attention to if you're
Mhm.
seeing that they're being taken advantage of in any way. Could be by caregivers, could be by people calling on the phone, asking them, if
Mhm.
they need to change the windows on their computer. It's anything like that. But
Sure.
I digress a little bit here. So now I want to move on to the next issue, which I think everyone needs to really, really think about, and that is an estate plan. Who needs one?
Oh, nobody. They're just no, I'm kidding. Um, my answer as an estate planning attorney would, of course, be everyone. The answer to who has one is yeah, about 25 or 30% of adult Americans. The rest, they think if they wash the car, it's going to rain. So they don't want to do the estate plan because that causes them to contemplate things that are unpleasant, your own demise, right? And it's unfortunate, but that's what happens. Most people don't do an estate plan. I used to tell clients that everybody who came into my office that signed an estate plan and walked out with their documents, I had no one drop dead in my parking lot. So it didn't happen that it rained after they washed the car.
Well, but you did have one client that did get hit by a bolt of lightning, but that was
Yeah,
long before your conversation with
yeah, I used to, because as an attorney doing an estate plan, you try to cover as much as you can and you cover as many of the big issues as you can. But there's always going to be, you can't cover everything. There is no such thing as perfection. Or even if you have an asset protection plan, you do the best you can because it's more art than science, whether it's asset protection planning or estate planning. And one of the things I used to use as sort of we all fall back on our little stories, right? When we're talking to clients, is I would say, well, we try to cover everything we can, but every now and then somebody gets hit by lightning and sometimes there's nothing you can do about that. But we don't worry about it because it doesn't happen very often until the one day where I had the one guy in my office say, but actually I was struck by lightning. And I go, well, that story's out the window now.
well, yeah, but I'm sure it's always a funny story to tell that the story is no longer the story.
Yes, and he was smiling about it and laughing. He wasn't being a jerk or anything. He thought we had a good laugh over it.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about about estate plans for people and
Mhm.
the elements that go into them, you have a lot of people that are being told you need a trust, you don't need a trust, you need these documents, those documents. how do you sort that out for people?
Well, attorneys have to ask a lot of nosy questions, and you have to ask a lot of questions about people's assets. You have to ask questions about family relationships, about their own health. And a lot of times sometimes you're pulling information out because people think things are awkward, they're embarrassed sometimes, if they got conflicts with themselves and kids, or even issues between spouses. The estate planning attorney needs to know not only the good things in your life, these are all my assets. And some people don't even want to disclose that because they just think, I'll just tell them a little bit. That doesn't work. We need to know all this stuff. We need to know everything about families. Even if you had a child from a prior relationship that you were never married and you don't know what happened to that child, we need to know if that child's out there, and or if there's problems between two of your oldest son and your oldest daughter, we need to know that. We need to know we need to know the good stuff, all the assets and all the things your hard work has done over your lifetime, but we need to know the dirty laundry too. We need to know if you have ties overseas. We need to know your citizenry, whether you're a U.S. citizen, green card, or undocumented. All those things affect the crafting of the estate plan. And as far as, yes, I did have people sometimes walk into my office, sit down and go, okay, attorney, I need a trust. And to me, that was kind of like walking into the doctor's office going, doctor, I have a pain in my side. You got to take my appendix out. And the answer to both of those is we don't know what you need until we find out all the information and are able to diagnose what's going on. Just like the doctor's not going to take your appendix out and, when he figures out you just ate a bunch of beans for lunch, or in the, Big Bang Theory where Sheldon Cooper was eating cruciferous vegetables and thought he was having, medical issues. Any more than we know whether or not you need a trust until we ask you all the nosy information about your assets and your family and everything else.
But Mr. Babiarz, I can just write my estate plan on a napkin and sign it, and it's all great.
You can do that potentially. And even some very smart people have sat there and gone to documents on the web or done their own documents. And can't say too much about this one because this is a current situation, but a particular person created a will. And this person who created it was actually a lawyer, but not an estate lawyer. And the will is valid, so it can go through the court system and be probated, but it is a mess. It is an absolute mess. And it is going to take a lot of work to untangle. And I'm really dating myself now this is probably a 30-year-old television commercial with the Fram oil filter where the guy says, you can change your oil and your filter every 3,000 miles. You can pay me now or you can pay me later. And that's really the situation with do-it-yourself estate plans sometimes. Yeah, you might have saved, some money by not hiring a professional to at least look at what you did. But your family's probably going to pay the price in the end.
Well, wouldn't you say that it's that way with do it yourself business structures, or do it yourself tax planning, or do it?
Yeah, a lot of things it is. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being educated. And I think that's what your program is designed to do. It's not designed again to say you're gonna be able to draft documents and do all this stuff when you want. No, you're not going to be a lawyer, you're not going to be a financial advisor, you're not going to be a CPA, you're not going to be a professional when you walk out of this. And no one's giving you advice about your situation anyway. But what you will know is, okay, I can research things, I can find out some information. And then when I walk into the lawyer's office or the CPA's office, or sometimes even the doctor's office, you go to WebMD and you go, what can cause this pain in my side? Well, appendicitis might be one of them, but it could be all these other things. And oh, look, eating excessive quantity of cruciferous vegetables might cause this problem. You better tell the doctor. He or she may ask that, but you might volunteer it. Because if you come in educated as a consumer, as a patient, as a client, you're going to make the time spent with your professional much more efficient, and they're going to be able to do a much better job for you.
Right, and one thing that you brought out earlier, which is not hiding information. When I was in a personal finance specialist and would be talking with people about their retirement plans, they would say, I would ask them, how much in assets do you have? Where are they? What are you doing? And they would tell me, but then once they were happy with the advisor that I would refer them to, they'd call me back and say, oh my gosh, there was some assets that I forgot about. Literally, they didn't forget. They were just
No,
wanting to see how the performance was but then that skews the entire plan.
right, right. It may skew your financial plan. It may skew your legal plan. It may skew the tax return that your accountant's trying to file for you. So it doesn't, you know, you're not a cat or a dog going to a vet where the vet has to try to look at you and try to figure out from examining external type things to figure out what's wrong. You're a human. You have to talk. You have to provide information. You have to give input so that the professional can advise you.
Well, and there is another area, and this I'm going to bring us back to estate planning for a second. And that is when you're choosing people like your executor or your powers of attorney, what what is the best and most effective way to choose who is going to be acting in those roles for you?
First of all, you always want to surprise people so that they get a no, it's just um, actually the antithesis of that is absolutely true. You need to ask the people, hey, do you want to be my executor? Do you want to be my agent for finances? Do you want to be my agent for healthcare? My life's going to be in your hands. People may or may not be comfortable with that. And you need to also make it clear that if they don't want to do it, no hard feelings, even if it's your kids, because let me tell you, especially being particularly managing somebody's money when they're incapacitated, making medical decisions for someone, including stuff like doctor, take all the life support off, mom is terminal, she doesn't want to live like this, or being an executor and trying to, deal with an estate. Those are not easy jobs. None of those are easy jobs. So the first thing is make sure you have a volunteer and not a hostage. Make sure that who you're asking it wants to do it and that you ask them. Um, I would make sure that trustworthiness is probably higher up on the list than knowledge. You may say, well, I've got two people that could manage my money. One's a wizard, but kind of shady, and the other one is, a little bit more basic, but I could give them $100,000 and I would come back tomorrow and it would all be there. The second person's the one you want to choose. Geography generally isn't in today's world isn't as big of a deal. It can be more important for healthcare because it's sometimes nice to have your healthcare agent actually walk into that hospital room where you're sitting, as opposed to popping up on Zoom like we're doing today. But it's again, go with the best choice, the most trustworthy one, the one that understands the ins and the outs and wants to do it. And then the second point is always think beyond your first person. A lot of people go, well, I want my spouse to do this. Okay, what after your spouse? Oh, you know, always think at least one or two more successors after your first choice.
Well, what happens if you have what if you've chosen someone and they, for whatever reason, they choose not to act, and then the second person is not able to act? Are there other organizations or people that could step in a case like that?
And I'm assuming you're asking me there's nobody else named in the order. It's
Correct. There's only
okay.
two, and yeah.
There are state laws that fill in the gaps, usually depending on the state you're in, where the law will give generally by degree of consanguinity, which is the fancy way of saying kinship. will look to the closest kin to see whether they should be, if you're dead, it would be administrator of your estate. If you're here but not competent, it would be guardian or conservator of your estate. So state law will fill in the gaps, but best that you make those choices if you can.
Or else someone will choose for you.
Correct. The judge will choose for you. Right.
There you go. Well, but there are also banks can step in if you've already designated them in your estate
Sure.
plan.
Sure.
This would be before. So could you do, like, let's just say you say this person can do it, this person, and if they don't do it, then so and so bank and trust would step in. Can you do three?
Oh, of course.
You could.
And the same rule as with individuals applies with institutions. Don't surprise them. You got to talk to them and say, I'm going to name you. If it's third place, they may not really take a great deal of interest. If they're your first choice, they're going to want copies of everything. And you need to tell them this is another place where you need to be perfectly honest on the extent of your assets, because a lot of banks don't want what they consider small estates. It's probably not what you and I or anybody else that takes the program may consider a small estate. But a lot of banks will say anything under $1 million, we're not interested, or $2 million. Some of the community banks might go 500,000, but you have to look and see because it's not cost effective for them to manage an estate that's unless it's of a certain size.
Gotcha. And then as far as healthcare power of attorney, we actually had a company that had a program called My Medical POA, which my sister, who was the geriatric care manager at the time, she could be a POA in the case that someone didn't have one. And so I'm not sure if there are lots of organizations out there that are doing this now, but is this an option? Where else could someone find a medical POA that they could have confidence in?
Ooh, that's going to be very state specific. Some states, like if you're already being cared for somewhere else, you're in a nursing facility, assisted living, whatever. Many states now will prohibit people that work for those facilities to be your agent for obvious reasons. There's a big conflict of interest there. There are private companies that will provide those services. You probably can find out more information by talking to either an elder law attorney in your state or perhaps your local senior center would have some information or a local community center.
So, but probably there will be resources out there for people.
Yeah, yes, there are, even if you have no one, because there are sometimes people that literally they don't have close family or family that they trust, and there are ways to do that. Yes.
So getting back to trusts, what are some of the myths about them? Because like you said, there are people that walk in and they think they need one, but what are the myths that go along with them?
And again, in the interest of time, because I see we're bumping up here, let me just focus on one that I think is a big myth because it ties very much in with the program that Pilotfish is offering. And that is if people say, I have a trust, an average layperson, I would bet money, and I could probably take really long odds that the type of trust they have is what's called a revocable living trust, which means, and generally they've made it, they're the trustee, they're the beneficiary, and they and their spouse. And they can put things in and out of that trust, they could take things in and out of that trust, and so forth. That's probably, if someone has a trust, probably 99 times out of 100, that's what they got. Maybe a little less than that, but it's pretty good odds that's what they have. The issue is a lot of people now trusts, once you're gone, can be set up to protect those assets for your kids. So if you die and your assets are in a trust, and let's say one of your children is going through a nasty divorce or being sued or something, if you set the trust up correctly, you can protect those assets in most states from problems of your kids. However, in most states, that revocable living trust is not going to protect a single dime from any one of your creditors. And that's the biggest misconception. Oh, I've got all my stuff in trust. So my creditors, it's protected from lawsuits. My creditors can't touch it. It's all good. Usually the answer is wrong. No, it's if you can get the money out, it's not protected. If you have to, there are such things as asset protection trusts. They used to be offshore. Now there many states are allowing them domestically. But even with that, you're not the trustee, you're not the outright beneficiary with unrestricted and unfettered access. If you can, the court will just say, take money out of your trust and pay your lawsuit, pay your creditor. So the number one myth probably about the revocable living trust is that for the person that creates it, it's an asset protection tool. It isn't.
Gotcha. And I think I know the answer to this, but maybe there are going to be those out there listening to this that don't. What if a creditor, what if all you have are retirement accounts and a creditor wants to come after those? Are they going to be able to do that?
Very well, two things. Things that are covered by the federal law called ERISA, which has been around for a long time. So in other words, you got a 401k, 403b, those are protected from creditors. If you have an IRA, depends on your state. Some states protect them more than others. So it's going to be, again, very state specific, very state driven as far as how much protection you get of those retirement accounts. So that, that brings up how nuanced asset protection planning can be. If you live in a state that doesn't protect IRAs and you retire from your company and you can leave your money in your 401k for a while, you might want to do it rather than rolling it into an IRA. On the other hand, if you're retiring to a state that protects your IRA, okay, retire to that state, become a resident, then yeah, roll it to an IRA and you've got much more control over how you can invest your assets.
What about your personal residence in the case of creditors and so forth?
Again, also very state specific. Some states have adopted a form of joint ownership called tenants by the entirety. I think we mentioned it early on, but I know some others have joined us since then, where husband and wife or married couple, shouldn't necessarily assume husband and wife, a married couple can own their principal residence in that form of titling, and a judgment against only one of those two cannot be satisfied from the house. Now, if the judgment's against both of you, tenants by the entirety doesn't help. But if one of you's in their own business and they get sued and there's a judgment against that person and the house is in tenants by the entirety and the other partner had nothing to do with the business, we probably have a house that's protected from that judgment.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I want to thank you so much for doing this today. Is there anything else you'd like to leave with our audience? Maybe we can open up the floor for a couple of questions. We do have some people out there, so.
Um, well, I'll finish up with a couple points. And the only one I think your program does cover, but wasn't, again, we just touched on it briefly, is asset protection even includes some very basic things like being aware of your surroundings and aware of your house and how to protect your house from things happening to it. You don't want your house to burn down or have damage that insurance isn't going to cover and so forth. You got to make sure you get really careful with social media because you can get yourself in a world of trouble that way. You got to be really careful about your identity. I think most people know that now, but things like passwords and double verification is really important. Change your passwords, make a list of them and put them somewhere safe. You have very good suggestions in your program about how to do that. And your reputation, really important. And that kind of ties in a little bit with social media because it can take a lifetime to build a good reputation, but about 10 nanoseconds on the wrong social media platform to ruin your lifetime of reputation building. So,
Absolutely. If someone hacks into your social media platform and is sharing things that are not necessarily wonderful,
right.
it impact you as well. So that's where keeping your passwords safe and your social media sites safe as well.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, well, does anyone have any questions that they wanna ask Mr. Babiarz before he departs here in a couple of minutes? Well, I guess you covered everything.
Yeah.
Right, I guess I perfect
Mhm.
swipe through the whole
Right.
program here.
Mhm. Oh,
All right.
should say comments?
Well, there we go. We've got Walter
Yeah.
here.
Yes.
Thank you, Walter. How are you
You're
today?
welcome. Good. How are you?
Good, thank
Uh,
you.
I
Did
didn't
you
know you're
have
gonna
a
be
question?
nicely dressed. Yeah, but no, it's more like a comment. I'm just saying this is very interesting information about the trust that you guys were talking about just right now at the end. It's important. I learned some new things because I do have a trust with the family, and your husband, Mr. Babiarz, mentioned about make sure that it is protected with asset protection. I believe it is. I'll go and read it again and find out. And about the IRA, wow, that's interesting. I did not know that, because I do have one, and you said to check with your state, so that's very interesting. I will find out
Mhm.
about that. So I will check with the my IRA agent about that. So hopefully it is, because I live in the great state of Utah, and they're very conservative. So hopefully it is. But again, it doesn't hurt to check and ask him, if it is protected, which I don't mind doing. It shouldn't be a problem. So that was interesting stuff I highlighted. And then on the last part about what you said of passwords and social media, that is important. So thank you for sharing that, for having the discussion. This is very interesting for everyone to know and use. So thank you.
Oh, you're very
Thank you.
welcome.
Thanks for
Yes.
joining us today, Walter.
Yeah, for sure.